Hello everyone, and thank you for being with us today. My name is George Villatis. I will be showing you in this Thea for SketchUp version 2.1 webinar all the new stuff that we have added in this new version for the Thea engine and Thea for SketchUp. This release is a major upgrade with features asked by our user base. Just before starting talking about new features, I have created one slide mostly talking about what is Thea render, in case anyone is not quite familiar with the engine. So let's start. The Thea render has three engines: biased, unbiased, and Presto engine. The biased engine is best for scenes with many lights and walkthrough animations. The unbiased engine computes every lighting transfer and is highly accurate. And finally, Presto runs on CPU and GPU, and it has been tuned for interactive rendering. Thea is also a spectral renderer. It has been built on top of a strong mathematical framework, and it can be used as a light simulator. Finally, volumetric scattering allows the creation of advanced effects like fog and materials like skin using subsurface scattering. So let's see what's new in version 2.1. This new release brings one of the most requested features from our user base, beveled edges. This feature allows you to smooth out the edges of an object with control over the radius and the minimum angle that the effect takes place. On the left, you can see the original geometry, while on the right, with a simple checkbox, you get beveled edges. The process is, of course, non-destructive and can be used in lots of cases where it is needed to break perfectly sharp corners or cut highlight, like in this case. Next feature is TRIPLANAR mapping, which is a special technique solving the issue of visible seams on an object. It can be very useful for surfaces that do not have proper UV coordinates. And like we'll see in the next slide, here you can see the difference with TRIPLANAR mapping giving us a seamless texture without the need for proper UV coordinates. And this is achieved by using the same texture projected from all three axes and blended together. WORLEY noise has been added to the list of procedurals and can be used to create cell-like structures that simulate textures of water and stone, among others. And here in this example, it has been used as a weight map to mix two different materials together. The edge ramp procedural makes it possible to apply color to the edges of a surface based on the minimum angle of adjacent faces and the radius of the edges. Similar to the previous example, using it as a weight map, like in this case, it is possible to apply different materials to the edges of an object. Support for LUT files has also been added. LUT stands for lookup table, and these files can be used to change the overall color and tone of the image. Adding features to the engine wasn't the only thing that we focused on. A performance boost up to 2 times has been achieved for the Presto engine compared to version 1.5. These improvements are based on key algorithmic optimizations as well as hardware advances with the most recent NVIDIA graphics cards. So with that said, let's move on to Thea for SketchUp version 2.1 and have a look at the new features. Backface material support has been added to the plugin, making it possible to visualize surfaces with different materials assigned to the front and back face of a surface. And this practically means that surfaces like curtains and fabric or leaves can now be easily achieved. In this last slide, I would like to mention more features that have been added to Thea for SketchUp, like automatic exposure, which with one click of a button, Thea takes care of the exposure by changing the display settings automatically. Thea materials can now be dragged and dropped onto the material editor from both the Explorer and the Thea browser. And finally, the material editor received lots of workflow enhancements, making it compact and easier to work with. And with that said, this brings me to the end of the presentation. Thomas will now take the screen and guide you through the new features with a live session. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. It's Thomas here, and I will show you simply Thea for SketchUp in action, and we will start with a model that is a Lego model, which contains several blocks of a different type, and as you see, the edges of the model are clearly visible in SketchUp, but if we start rendering Thea, you will clearly notice that the edges are gone in the rendering. That it's very hard to distinguish each individual edge. We can, of course, show edges coming from the SketchUp, overlay them on the top of the rendering, but this has some drawbacks. It doesn't look good when we zoom in. So as we see here in this model, one particular object here, one particular block, looks completely different from the rest. And as you see, probably see on your screen, the geometry of the object is same as the others, but has a certain property set for it, which is the beveling. And as you see, when I select the different blocks, they don't have this option enabled, and the difference is very clear. Those nice highlights coming from the light source add a lot of realism to the whole model. So let's see how this model would look like if we would enable the beveling for the whole model. I will turn off the edges coming from the SketchUp. So we see now just pure rendering coming from Thea, and we can clearly notice each individual block showing in the rendering, and obviously the difference here is tremendous. The good thing about this is that the beveling effect is done in rendering only. So the geometry actually is not getting heavier, but the appearance is looks exactly like we would apply a modification to a geometry. And as you see, even very tiny details are visible. So divisions between individual panels, the shadows on them, everything is shown very precisely and attractively when compared to the original model. So that's the beveling feature in action. I will now go to the next model, which shows the triplanar mapping. So we've got two balls with the holes in them, and one uses a standard kind of cubic mapping that would normally be used simply when kind of SketchUp mapping fails, or yeah, we simply cannot UV map an object correctly. And this ball in the front uses our new triplanar mapping, and the difference is quite obvious. We see that in this part, in case of cubic mapping, the edges coming from a different direction of the texture mapping, they show pretty clearly, why in triplanar mapping, as you can see, there is no edge visible, and the transition between each direction is fluid, is perfect, even inside this complicated aperture in the model. So this is done by applying the triplanar projection. So if we select here a fuse texture, as you see, the projection for this texture is set to triplanar. If we select this model, we use cubic mapping. So this is the triplanar mapping in action, and what we can control within this projection is the way the different textures transition between each other. So in here, when I zoom in, you can see when I go to triplanar cutoff set to 100 and triplanar sharpness 100, we may see some edges between different directions of the projection. But if we go to standard values or decrease them slightly, we will see that those edges and those differences they disappear. So those two parameters, this one controls simply how far the smoothing goes between where the edge, when the projections meet, and the triplanar sharpness defines how sharp this transition is. Yes, so the less sharp, the more smooth it will be, and it's simply less visible. So default 0 and 0 values are kind of best, but if you would like to tweak them, yes, it is possible to do so. And you can also see now a texture properties window, which is something, a floating texture properties window, which is something new also for version 2.1. Those properties were before shown just below the layer properties, but in case of when using a large preview, for example, it could cause a problem. So now by selecting a certain texture, we see its properties on the side, and it helps much in the workflow. So that's it. I will now show an edge ramp, a different model, very simple model. We've got 4 cubes here, and each of them are using edge ramp procedural. in the layer weight. So we, for example, in those two cases, we got a thin glass shader, which is responsible for the inner part of the model, and metal, which is getting exposed underneath this mask. And this mask simply is the edge ramp with the standard colors, white and black, and with some controls in tone mapping. And when I zoom in, you will notice that although those two components, those two cubes, they use same material setup, there is no difference. They look different, and here we got a very soft transition between the one layer, the metal layer, and the thin glass. While here it is very sharp, very defined, and the difference is coming from the gamma applied here. In this case, gamma goes to 100%, and in this case we got gamma going to -100, and then brightness and contrast play a role here in getting the edge sharp. So I will show you on this model, we can modify this with going gamma to -100. So we got a little bit sharper now edge, but it's not completely sharp. You can go with contrast to 100 and the brightness to 100, and we have now as sharp edge as in the other. So that's how we can play with tone mapping with edge ramp, and simply it gives us better control over the procedural. In this cube, I simply show that we can use edge ramp also, for example, in an emitter slot in the emitter tab. And when I go to environment, I will turn off illumination. You'll simply see that the cube is emitting light, casting some light on the adjacent one. And the last one is simply kind of my try to create sort of a not an edge shader, but simply show some cracks only on the edges of the cube. And this is done by mixing again two materials, basic one, the red one, and the metal below it. And it is done through the layer mask, which is using a bitmap and our edge ramp shader. And this allows to control how both materials, both layers, are mixed together. So we got this golden frame around the edges, and also it goes a little bit inside where the texture is mapped. And yeah, and simply the red basic layer is visible from there on. Yeah, so that's how the edge ramp works in the plugin. And now I will go to the next model, which is yeah, WORLEY noise. This is a different procedural, which was George already has shown on the renderings, but I will show now in more detail. So here we got a material which has a metal layer at the bottom, basic layer, which is this black appearance, and a coating which gives us the glossy appearance. If I disable this, you will see just those two layers below. So we've got this this object, and again the appearance of the bottom layer is done through a procedural texture, and this texture is Worley noise. And the Worley noise has several parameters available here, and different types of patterns that we can use. As George has mentioned, that the Worley noise usually tries to mimic some patterns existing in nature. And so we've got, for example, a cell pattern, yes, which can be, we can, okay, try this again. So we got a cell pattern. We can control the distance size. I will zoom in so you see it better. It looks like a natural, like a wing of a fly, or yes, or a dragonfly. There is a smudge option, which gives us kind of appearance of small dots, and mosaic, which is kind of show us kind of golden flakes or this kind of appearance. Yeah. And we can control the scale of those flakes and the distance kind of between them. And the distance can be also defined in a few ways. So there's the pattern type, and the distance can be combined together to produce different effects. And I think that simply it is the best visible in the cell type. When we use Euclidean distance, this looks very kind of natural, like a stone, as I said, as a wing. Now, with Manhattan, we got a different appearance. It's more kind of technical. It is something in between a very sharp pattern and this natural one. There is a max pattern, which is kind of a combination between those two, and as you see, some objects are simply white, some parts of the texture. And we can have a custom mixing, which gives us some control by this distance density. And with modifying this, we got simply different appearance, more dense, and kind of different mixing. So as you see here, it's more natural, less technical. And with using the Worley noise procedural, we can achieve materials as complex, as nice. For example, this one shown by George in the slides. This material, as you will see, has also those two layers, but it uses the Worley noise in reflectance, in a bump. We can use this also in roughness, for example, and decrease the roughness, and you will see that the black color it's more rough. We should be doing this. Yeah. So that's the Worley noise. We can achieve very interesting effects with it, and the plus of procedural texture is that we actually don't have to map them. They are seamlessly covering the whole geometry, and the transitions are, we are certain that transitions will be correct in all cases. And yes, so the last model I will be showing today is a model in which I will present the double-sided or actually back face feature. As you probably, some of you know, in Thea in the past, we had just a front material, and in SketchUp we got a material that is on the front face and on the back face, and it was causing some issues with model in export and the rendering. And now in Thea 2.1 we've got support for both sides. So independent materials can be in the front and a different material on the back. As you see here, we've got an interior, and we've got here. I'll show the tray. Okay, so we've got. I have selected here now this small face above the painting, and I will apply an emitter material to the front. And as you see, the stripe is producing light, it's giving light in the downwards direction, but it can also give this light in the other direction without the necessity of simply multiplying the geometry. So this is kind of a different way of using the backface material. But in this case, I would like to show you a quite interesting trick that we can use backside materials in Thea to show rooms such as this one. Because as you see here, I am using 35 millimeters lenses, so it is kind of quite standard lens length. But in this interior, it's very hard kind of to show the whole room because it is small, and as you see, even increasing the focal length to 24 millimeters, so it's a wide angle. We see this kind of not nice distortions in perspective, and it's natural, but it is not looking good. And what we can do in such a case, the case of such a small interior, we can use our backface material solution. And now I will show you a nice trick. I will select the ceiling. As we see, it uses the default material, but I will put a transparent material on the backside. So I select the transparent material, and what we get is simply the view of the room from the top. And this material, I'll show you how it works. Simply, it is a thin glass with index of refraction set to 1. So you have to show the index of refraction and modify this to 1. And this will give you, with the transmittance of being white, this will give you kind of an air material, which will be transparent. The good thing is that this material, when applied to a backface, for example, here, it will give us a view of the room, not only from this the upper side, but from the opposite side to the entrance. And as you see, our pink wall is visible in the reflections in the mirror, and even, for example, here it simply gives this nice color bleeding on the wall, but it is transparent from the backside. So we can do same, for example, for this wall. here, and you will see this nice effect that both walls and the ceiling is transparent, and we can show clearly what's happening within the room. This kind of view wouldn't be achievable if the wall wouldn't be transparent. So we can show now, for example, the same room using 50 millimeters length, and as you see, it looks much better. There is no perspective distortion here, and we can go even as high as 100 millimeters, which obviously in reality wouldn't be possible. So that's all from me for today. I invite you to join our forum. We are looking for some ideas for our new major release coming later this year. If you have some suggestions, some ideas, what we could add, please join the forum and post there. I'm waiting for your feedback. Thank you very much.